Good morning.
Let's try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, if you were here last week, you were here for the first part of a two-part series I've been doing. You'll remember that we were talking about how great it would be if you had the power to follow through on your New Year's resolutions. Now, if you'll remember back to last week, we have to kind of recover some ground so we can pick up today. We're going to look at the fact that oftentimes there's changes we want to make in our lives. Now maybe these are things you want to start doing that you're not doing. Exercising more, eating the right foods. Maybe you are in general wanting to just start building better daily spiritual habits like praying more, reading your Bible more. Then there are also the things that we want to change, things we need to stop doing that we are having a hard time stop doing. These are the bad habits that come into our lives and start to control our lives. And we're going to talk about those to an extent, but we covered a lot last week, the fact that the biggest issue many of us face is the things that we want to do are the things that we don't do, and the things we don't want to do are the things that we end up doing. In fact, I have a quote for you this week. It's from Mahatma Gandhi. Has anyone heard of Gandhi?
Very much so.
The difference between, this is what he said, the difference between what we are doing and what we are capable of doing would solve most of the world's problems. Gandhi said that. And that's the thing, is it's the difference between what we want to do and what we actually end up doing. The struggle that we wrestle with. And last week, we started by talking about Paul. And what Paul wrote in a letter to the Romans. In chapter 7 of Romans, he writes this. He says, "For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing." And although Paul brings up this struggle that we saw, we also know that at the end of Paul's life, in his letter to Timothy, he is able to write and say to Timothy, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race." Now, everyone in this room has a story that we are telling with our lives. This is a story we are writing page by page, decision by decision. You are writing this story today in the small things you do. And what your story is going to look like tomorrow is really based on the decisions you're making today. Well, we talked about how a big issue is that 40 to 45% of your decisions on average are automated, made for you through your habits. And that can be a real issue because if you're not where you want to be today, it's most likely because of your habits you had yesterday. And if you want to go somewhere tomorrow that's where you want to be, you need to learn to change your habits for today. And so we looked at Romans 12, 1 and 2. And from Romans 12, 1 and 2, we came up with this big idea for this time together, which is we become transformed into our best selves as we renew our minds with spirit-empowered daily habits lived out inside an environment that pushes us to our goal. Now, last week we took a look at the first part of that. We took a look at how we can start building healthy spiritual habits, small ones, easy ones, that will start to combat the fleshly habits that we all have naturally. And in changing out which habits we start to automate our lives through, we begin resetting and renewing our mind, which is a key to transformation. But here's the issue. We want to be able to live our lives with the power to change our lives from the lives we don't want to live anymore. But to do that, we need to plant these seeds, which are the habits. But seeds need the right soil to grow in. And that's why I want to talk about the second part of that statement, which is the environment that we need to have if we want our habits to be able to grow up healthy. Because at the end of our lives, wouldn't we all love to say that we fought the good fight? That we finished the race? We didn't let our self-automating habits drive us to places we didn't want to be and look back at our lives wondering what happened to us. So, after we examined the spiritual empowered daily habits, we need to talk about what environments are going to let those habits actually grow and flourish. Now, I want to quote someone, but I'm afraid that a lot of you won't know who he is. His name is Winston Churchill. Okay. So, for those of you who don't know, and it's okay if you don't know, not everyone is at the same grade. It's okay. Not everyone pays attention to the same level in history class. That's fine. Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II. Does everyone know what World War II was? Show of hands.
That's what I was wondering.
Okay, there was a war, and it involved the whole world pretty much, and it was a sequel to the first one. That's what World War II was. There you go. So Winston Churchill had this very famous quote. He said, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. If you look at your physical environments, and it even applies to our social environments that we build and shape, they begin to shape the kinds of people we are. One of the biggest examples I can think of is if you look at Europe, what would you say religiously is the most prominent buildings in Europe? Churches, cathedrals. You had that thing with Notre Dame where it nearly burned down. And we talk about these large cathedrals. And one thing that is awesome about these cathedrals is in the fact that when we look at architecture, it really, really is trying to give you this feeling of awe as you enter them. And the hope is that you feel this way towards God. But I will say this, and this is my personal opinion. I know many professors at the seminary who would profoundly disagree with me. When we look at the religious people that came out of those cathedrals, what is Europe's church environment like today? What we have is a lot of really impressive buildings that are very empty. And what's really sad is that those cathedrals, those big buildings, started to become symbols of pride, and those symbols of pride really stopped making church about God, started making church about the people who went to church, and now those churches are not really churches anymore. They shaped these magnificent buildings, and all of a sudden their pride and egos started to take over. And now we look at Europe, and there's a drastic decline in the average churchgoer's attendance when we look at the European church today. And I think that's a good example of this principle where we shape our buildings and they shape us. But this also happens on the social environment level. When we look at the people we hang around, the environments with the friends we have, all of a sudden, us trying to build new habits becomes a lot more difficult. And you know this, and I know this. And here's how I know that you know this. Quick question. How hard is it to take out the trash? Not that hard, right? Like millions of people do it every day. You go, you got the trash there, you bag it up, tie it up, pull it out, put it in a new bag, throw the old one out. Should be really simple. How hard is it to take out the trash when your mom is like, "Hey, take out the trash, I'm going to the store, I'll be back later." And then right at the moment she leaves, you have your best friend come over and they have a new game they want to play with you? All of a sudden, that simple act of taking out the trash, because of your environment, has become infinitely more difficult. When your mom gets back, she's like, "Why is this still here?" And you're like, "Trash? What trash? I didn't know I had to take out trash. What are you talking about? What is this trash thing?" The point is, even the simple things that we want to do, when put in the wrong environment, we're not going to do them. And oftentimes, our environment is built to discourage us and distract us. Show of hands, how many of you become easily distracted? Yeah. I mean, my wife's knitting right in front of me. She's obviously not listening. She's so distracted. My point is, as we gather this morning, if we want to build those habits, the habits that are going to change and shape our lives, we need to start building the environment we want if we're going to succeed. So, what I want us to do this morning is we're going to take a look at an Old Testament example of someone who did this very, very well. He is someone who actually was able to build an environment to do a task that most people thought was impossible to do. So that's why we're all going to turn to the story of Nehemiah in the Old Testament. So if you will open your Bibles to Nehemiah. Now, I am going to deeply inconvenience everyone here. Because when you get to chapter 6 of Nehemiah, I would like, if you are able to stand. And we're going to read verses 1 through 4 together. We're almost there. All right. Now, when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall and that there were no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set up the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me saying, "Come, let us meet together at Hakkephirim." I'm going to give that my best shot. In the plain of Ono. But they intended to do me harm, and I sent them messengers to them saying, "I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them in the same manner. Dear God, thank you so much that we have this opportunity to be in your word and to let it teach us and instruct us for how we can shape our lives to better align with your will for our lives. I pray that you'd give our hearts the conviction and the desires to follow through with this. In your powerful name I pray, amen. You can all be seated. So let's talk about Nehemiah for a second. In fact, let's even talk about before Nehemiah for a second. So, what had happened in Israel's history leading up to this was a long period where they had lost their independence. They were no longer their own country, free to govern themselves. Because first they were taken over by Assyria. And then the Babylonians came and took over Assyria. And then the Persians came and took over the Babylonians. So, I want you to think about it. Israel has been in this place where they have not had the freedom to be their own country for around 300 years at this point. And in this sequence of takeovers, even a large portion of the Israelites had been forced to go live in exile, and they started growing up in exile. And even after some of them were freed to go home, some of them, because all they had known was the exile, stayed there. And this is kind of the story of where we find Nehemiah. Now this is around the year 444 BC. Give or take a few years, there's estimates. And it's under the rule of a Persian king in Persia, and his name is Artaxerxes I. I've been trying to convince my wife that this is a good baby name. If any of you start talking baby names with someone, always bring up Artaxerxes. It's my favorite one. It's biblical. And you're like, oh, we need a biblical baby name. Artaxerxes. That's the one. That's a side note. Sorry. So Artaxerxes I is the emperor, the king of kings of Persia. He is the big cheese of Persia. All right. And Nehemiah has gotten into a fairly high position where he is the king's cupbearer. Now, how many of you know what a cupbearer does? For the few of you who don't, a cupbearer is the person who will test the king's drink and food by eating some of it. Pretty cool job. You get to eat food and get paid, right? Well, you're not necessarily getting paid in the same way. But the downside to it is if someone tried to poison the king, you die. So you were the guinea pig. He was fairly close with the king. And what we know is that all of a sudden one day, Nehemiah gets met up with by an old friend who had been in Jerusalem. Jerusalem being the capital of Israel. And he asks him, how is Jerusalem? Nehemiah asks his friend how Jerusalem's doing. And the friend looks at him and says, it's not good at all. Jerusalem has no walls. We have been having people come from the nearby cities, from the nearby countries, and take advantage of us. We are defenseless. We are humiliated. We're in this place of great despair where we can't protect ourselves. Now, this kind of seems like a foreign idea to us. And I heard this a good pastor explain this illustration, and it's kind of a weird illustration, but you're going to have to go with me. Have any of you ever had your parents take the door off your bedroom? Maybe, maybe not. So here's what sometimes happens. Your parents can't trust you for this reason or that reason. They want to punch you. They take the door off your bedroom. And now you don't have a private life anymore. It's humiliating. You feel vulnerable. You feel this weird pressure because what used to be your sacred space now is completely open to other people coming, invading that space. Your siblings might steal stuff from you. You can't stop it. It's a very difficult place to be in. And it's kind of like that on a small scale for this city, which was on a much larger scale. And what we have is this city who's vulnerable. They're humiliated. Having a gate, a wall is almost a thing of pride. It keeps your people safe. And when you don't even have the power to keep your own people safe, it becomes an issue. And when Nehemiah hears about this, he is heartbroken. And he goes to Artaxerxes, and in those days, you had to be happy around the king all the time. You had to put on a good face. But he chose to be sad. And the king noticed this and asked him what's wrong, and he explains the situation. And then he is bold enough to ask for some time off work. How much time? Basically, it's going to be the rest of his life. He's moving back. And it's this bold move he makes, this brave move. But the king says, okay. And in fact, the king says, tell you what, I'm going to get you your supplies you need. And I'm going to give you a note so that as you're traveling back to Jerusalem, you're going to be protected as long as you have my note explaining that you're going on my authority. So Nehemiah travels back to Jerusalem. And he gets there, and it's even worse than he imagined. And he starts to try and figure out what he's going to do about this situation. And slowly, bit by bit, he gathers people, he gathers this plan, and he starts to implement this plan, and he assigns people to start rebuilding the wall. And each person, each family is in charge of the wall that's near them. And they're in charge of just building that small portion of the wall. And each day they go out working on this. And eventually the other nearby cities, the nearby countries hear about this. And all of a sudden they want to stop this because if Jerusalem builds a wall, they no longer get to go take advantage of Jerusalem. A fortified, walled city is a military threat. These people do not want Jerusalem to have a wall. And so they start sending opposition. They start at first threatening and then attacking the workers. And Nehemiah he builds a buddy system where one person is building the wall, the other person has a sword and is fighting off defenders, and Whenever someone on the wall sees an enemy off in the distance, they blow their trumpets and everyone swarms together to that section of the wall to defend it. And this is the system that Nehemiah implements. And it's working. And the people who want to stop him don't like that it's working. And it gets to the point where Nehemiah, in his success and what he's doing for the city, they even make him governor. And here we get to this section where we have these people, Sanballat, Tobiah, and a guy named Geshem, and they're the leaders of the opposition against Nehemiah. And what they want to do is they decide they need to stop Nehemiah, and they're going to try and kill him to do it. So, here's what they do. They send to him and they say, hey, why don't you come on down? Let's set up a time. We'll get together over tea, maybe some biscuits if you like biscuits. And we'll just talk about these differences we're having and, we'll sort things out. And we're leaders. We can just make this peaceful arrangement. But of course, what they're planning to do was lead him into a trap where they would kill him. Now, Nehemiah, when this messenger comes to him, he's not in a governor's office, sitting comfy in a chair, leaning back with his Doritos and making sure that everyone's doing their job. Where is Nehemiah? He's up on the wall near the city, where the city gate is going to go, and he's working. And it's in this environment that Nehemiah sets up the perfect environment for him to be able to continue making this change and not succumb to the pressure. And he says something to them that is genius. And he says, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Now I want to stop here and let's actually examine what this environment is that Nehemiah has set up. The first thing you'll notice is because he's on the wall, he has already put limits on his environment. As the governor, he could have just delegated tasks for other people to do. That's probably what you would want to do. Imagine that if you had become CEO of a company. You're not going to do the daily work, the boring jobs that you pay low-level people to do. You want to sit back in your comfy office and pay other people to do those things. But in setting limits on himself, Nehemiah is restricting the bad behaviors he doesn't want to have in himself. And I want to point this out very specifically. What he is stopping himself from becoming is someone with too much idle time controlling what they're doing. Have any of you ever heard the phrase, idle hands make the devil's work? Well, I want to talk about this for a second, and I'm glad that Robbie brought up what he did, because let's talk about a different Old Testament person for a second, David, in the story with Bathsheba that we were talking about. Do you know why I think David was most liable to fall to the temptation he did? Because at the very beginning of that story, it says, now, when at the time of year when the kings go out to war, David was at home. Here's the point. Where was David? Where was he supposed to be? He wasn't out at war like he was supposed to be at that time of year. He wasn't with his armies, doing work, keeping himself busy, doing the things that need to happen. He was at home with way too much free time. How true of this is it of us that those habits that you want to stop doing, you catch yourself doing them when you're bored. You don't have really anything better to do. You're trying to find something better to do, and all of a sudden those habits sneak up on you, and your weakness is the greatest when you feel this sense of boredom. Hold on one sec. By setting limits on himself, Nehemiah is avoiding the bad behavior. And here's what we want, ideally, when we're setting up our environment. We want to make bad habits hard for us to do, while making good habits easy. So when you're setting up your environment, if you want to set up your environment to help you be successful, you want to think of ways to make bad habits hard for you to do, while making good habits easy. Let me give you an example. When I was in college, I was very addicted to a certain phone game, Candy Crush. It was colorful. They said cool things like sweet and awesome as I did the swipes and whatnot. I got so addicted to it, I couldn't stop playing it almost at any time. It was interfering with how I was interacting with people. Because mid-conversation, I would have the temptation when I got bored to pull out my phone and just be like, oh yeah, let me check on that, and then just start swiping away. And it became a problem because I couldn't stop. And this was a bad habit I had that actually controlled a good part of my freshman and sophomore year of college. And I knew I needed to stop. So what did I do? I limited myself and made it hard for me to do that bad habit. How did I do that? I deleted the app from my phone. Genius. Because guess what? When I was tempted to play Candy Crush later on, and I realized I was going to have to go through the process of finding it and re-downloading it every time I wanted to play, it became a lot less appealing to me to play. Most of your bad habits, they've done studies on this. If you can avoid doing your bad habits for 3 to 4 minutes after you get the urge, you will have enough time to process and turn down and say no to yourself when it comes. Bad habits aren't something we constantly do. It's something that we get triggered, as we were taught last week. We get triggered when something happens that causes us to go to our behavior, and then the reward center of our brain, after we've done it, makes us happy, and then it starts all over again. So, if at the moment you're triggered, it becomes so inconvenient for you to actually go through with the behavior, and that urge that only lasts a few minutes, if you can kind of make that time a time where it is harder for you to engage in behavior, you are more likely to have the willpower to tell yourself not to behave that way. We can set ourselves up for victory when we set ourselves up in the right environment. And those bad habits that we want to stop doing, we can make harder when we try. We can make good habits easier as well. I'll guarantee you, if your goal was to eat healthier, well, one way you can make the bad habit of eating unhealthy go away, get rid of the junk food in your cupboards. Tell your moms to stop buying the junk food if you're the ones who eat it well and they fill up your cupboards. If you don't have the junk food there, are you really going to go to the store, spend money, and get it? Other things. Make the good habits easier. If you want to eat healthy, make the healthy snacks very easily accessible to yourself. Because if you have to work just as hard to get a healthy snack as you do an unhealthy snack, there's a very low chance you're going to go for the healthy snack. You can make them easier though. Put the oranges out on a plate in the middle of the table, and when you get hungry, you reach over and grab one. I said oranges because I just got a bag of oranges, and I love that. It's like they knew that I needed it for my sermon today. When Nehemiah is up on the wall, he is going to, by being up on the wall, working hard, he is limiting how easy it would be for him to come down and be distracted by these people who are coming after him. He's making it harder for his good work to be stopped. In fact, when they come up to him, what does he say? He says, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Isn't it the case that the change you want to make in your life is always, and I'm not saying that other things aren't important, but it seems to be always more important than those distractions that come up. And here's the difference between something that is urgent and something that is important. Urgent things are the things that are time sensitive, the things that happen every day that fill up your schedule and take you away from what you should be doing. There's a difference between urgent things and important things. Important things are those goals that will change and shape your life. Urgent things are the things that are going to come up and distract you. And let me be very frank with you. You will never run out of urgent things to do to fill up your schedule. There will always be another urgent thing that is trying to grab your attention. And it is always a mistake to let the urgent things get in the way of the important things. So the first thing he does to build this environment he wants is he limits his ability to have the options to do the thing he doesn't want by putting himself up on this wall. Now, he then poses a question to the people, to the messengers. And he says this, and I love the way he says this. He says to them, and if you guys will look back with me, this is right in verse 3. He says, "Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" And I love the imagery here because he's up on a wall. And what he's saying is, why should I lower myself to do the thing that's less important when I have something that's so important that I am doing? And I want you to imagine that with whatever your goal is. Think in your mind, picture that goal, that change you want to have happen. If that change is important to you, why should you lower yourself and settle for the distractions? In Nehemiah's case, I honestly believe if he wasn't working on that wall at that time, if he was sitting in some government office, he would have found time to go to those meetings. And it would have killed him, literally. Why should you lower yourself from what you know is important for you to work on in order to engage in things that aren't as important, those distractions? I want us all to say what he says together, because this is what you are going to say to yourself when you're in that situation. You're going to say, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. So everyone, you're going to repeat after me. So I'm going to say it. I'm going to count to 3. You will all say it.
Okay.
I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. 1, 2, 3. I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. This is what you are going to say in the midst of when you have these distractions come up, but you have something far more important. If you're going to shape your environment to limit those distractions, you will have the better chance. Now, there's something else here that's so crucial. And it is the fact that when Nehemiah built his system where he's going to be working on the wall, even he is not working alone. In fact, when I described that system, everyone had these buddies on the wall, these partners on the wall. And so another part of building an environment that's going to help you with your behaviors is by putting the right people beside you in that environment. Okay? You want people who are going to push you forward. People who are going to keep you accountable to your goals. If your goal was something as simple as I need to get control of my anger, and you had someone that could ask you every few days how that was going, and you had to be accountable to them, you're going to be a lot more on top of why it is when you fail and why it is you succeed, and they're going to be pushing you forward. And we need people in our lives to push us forward in our goals. On average, you are going to be as successful as the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around. Studies have shown this consistently. Think of the 5 people that you were closest to. Chances are, financially and success-wise, you're going to be at the average of those 5 people. The people you surround yourself with are the people who are going to determine how far you get. These are your friends. When Nehemiah set up his wall system, he set himself up with buddies who could keep him accountable, who can say, hey, I'm doing this work, you're doing that work. We're not coming down and setting ourselves to do lower things. We're pushing each other forward. And you need to be careful about the people you pick. Because there are going to be Sanballat and Tobias, but they're not always going to look like enemies. Sanballat and Tobiah, their goal is to harm and ruin Nehemiah. In fact, what we see in verse 4 shows that they are not just going to try this once, they are persistent. Because they sent to Nehemiah asking him to come down and join their club and talk with them, where they're trying to kill him. They sent to him 4 more times. But he was persistent. The people in your lives oftentimes that are pulling you down, though, aren't coming to you looking like enemies. They're coming to you looking like your friends. There's a difference between a friend who pushes you forward and an accomplice that holds you back in what you don't want to do. The friend who pushes you forward, this is the person who knows what your goal is and wants you to achieve your goal. In my sophomore year of college and my freshman year of college, I had the same roommate. His name was Brennan. Now, the great thing about me and Brennan was that both of us were really bad with picking up women and talking to girls. Anyone can relate? Luke? Joshua? Just checking. Robert?
Yeah.
One part of our issue is that we were actually just too afraid to ask them out. And that was an issue. Like, we had this fear, like we were just going to get rejected. So what's the deal? And me and him kind of made this pact. And we said, hey, how about this? From now on, whenever one of us asks out a girl, the other one owes him a trip to take him out for ice cream. So me and Brendan did this. Anytime one of us asked out a girl, and the girl didn't have to say yes. We weren't celebrating a girl saying yes to going out with us. We were celebrating the fact that we had the courage to ask someone out. And me and Brendan set up this system where we were accountable to trying to reach this goal where we were trying to be more outgoing. And it even crossed over into stuff like in swing dance. I went to swing dance club with Brennan. And my goal there wasn't as much to ask out girls as it was, I wanted to learn how to swing dance. But if you have a fear of asking out girls, you also have a fear of asking girls to dance. And so me and him wanted to dance, but the only way to get better at swing dance is to actually practice. And the only way to practice swing dance is with a partner, and therefore you had to ask a girl. So me and him would hold ourselves accountable and say, hey, before the end of the night, each of us are going to at least ask 3 girls to dance at swing dance. And by doing this, me and him, holding each other accountable, got better. We held each other to this standard where we knew where we wanted to be, and together we were able to consistently, and both of us, get better at swing dance because we were able to carry through on asking girls. And not every girl says yes, and that's fine. But the point was, we improved in our skill of being timid. And so, one of the great things about what Nehemiah did with his wall is he set everyone up in pairs where they could keep each other accountable and hold each other to the best standards. When you have a friend that doesn't do that, here's what it looks like. You're trying to eat healthier, to lose weight. They only want to go out and eat junk food with you. They always invite you to eating junk food. You want to stop doing a certain habit. I know this is hopefully not any of your issue, but a lot of people, one of their biggest struggles is they want to quit smoking, but all their friends smoke. And all of a sudden they get caught up into smoking because their friends, the only social interaction they have is smoking, and their friends will have them smoke with them. And even though they're not intentionally coming as enemies, they are being very detrimental to your ability to develop the good habits and get rid of the bad habits. I want you to think about this in your life. Is there someone in your life who is keeping you from achieving that change you want to make this year? Because sometimes you can talk to them and they're willing to change for you, and those are the great friends to have. But if they're not, sometimes for seasons of your life, you kind of have to let go of some relationships and friendships if you want to make the impact that's going to give you the biggest change for the long goal. Sometimes relationships in your life are actually holding you back from where you ought to be. If you're ever in a dating situation and all of your family and friends can't stand the person you're dating, usually there's a good reason. That relationship might be holding you back from where you should be. And they can see an insight that you were choosing not to see. It's not because you're smart, it's because you're kind of been blinded. I want you to know that it's okay when you realize these things to cut people out of your life. It might hurt in a moment, but you have to think about that goal in the long run. I want to bring that back to the last thing that's really important. And where Nehemiah was on that wall, with only the top of the wall and the gates left, he had his eyes set on his goal. If you want to create a successful environment for you to be able to change your behaviors, you need to create an environment where you can keep your eyes on your goal. And make sure your goal is specific. Nehemiah knew that when I put those gates in, this wall is going to be complete, and the people of this city will be safe. And he was able to notice that he was doing a great work, and he didn't have time to lower himself down and do a lesser work. He didn't have time to engage in his distractions because he could see his bigger goal right there. If you want to change, if you want to make that change this year, you need your goal, and you need to be specific about your goal. If you're like me, you want to lose weight, don't just say lose weight generically. Because next week you lost a pound, you're done. Congrats. You want to set a weight you want to get to. If your goal, and this could be anything, if your goal is spiritual and you want to be able to read a certain amount of the Bible each day, be specific. And like I told you last week, you can get there in tiny steps, building your ability so that someday you will hit that goal. If your goal is to be able to pray longer, you can be specific with that goal, and you can train yourself and build yourself up to get that goal. But when you let those distractions become more important than that goal you're setting, you're going to lose it. You're going to relapse. And you're going to be one of those people that had a goal, but even though you wanted to continue going after the goal, you decide you didn't have the willpower to go after it. And you're going to feel defeated. And it's going to create this pattern where you're not going to be where you want to be in the future. They did this experiment. I want to talk about this really quick because out of these three things, which I'll make it easy for you to remember. Set limits, find battle buddies. Battle buddies was, they're on the wall together, battling it out. Set sight on the goal. Out of these three things, they found that each one helped another. And for instance, one of the studies they've been doing a lot of studies these days. One of the major ones they've been doing is on addiction. And so your goals, your environment for addiction makes a big difference. And they did this study on rats. Now, they did this first study, and they had done this study a long time ago. They had a rat in a cage. There are 2 water bottles. One was laced with cocaine, one was normal water. Surprise, the rat became addicted to the cocaine water and eventually killed himself. Not like, just kept drinking it, became very unhealthy, died. Well, a scientist looked at this experiment a while down the road and said, wait a second, this isn't fair. We put a rat in a cage with nothing to do but sip drugs all day. So what he decided to do is he was going to build a rat park. Okay, this is like rat heaven. He put in other rats, so they're a company. He put in little rat toys and had like snacks available. But in his rat park, he kept the same 2 water balls. And what he found was that all of the rats preferred the normal water and wouldn't touch the cocaine water. Now here's why that is. Rats, similar to humans, have this thing, and we call it addiction, but really what it is it's a need to bond. And we bond to the things that our brain, it releases this chemical called dopamine. We get addicted, we want that connection, and we're trying to bond with something. Well, when people are able to bond with each other, when you have the right battle buddies, the battle buddies are headed towards the right goal, and you've set limits on the things you're not going to do together. When you have those right bonds, you don't feel the need to go to the addiction. And that's where this study came from, is it said the opposite of addiction, the thing that fights addiction is connection. But connection in the right environment. And so here's what I want to bring out for you is, if we want to build environments for good behavior and better, and to achieve the goals we want, and stop doing the things we don't want to do, we need to be sure we're building an environment that has the right limits, that has the buddies, so that we don't feel like we're lacking in our bond, and our connection, and how we want to bond with each other, and we can keep our eyes set on the right goals. And I know that these things can oftentimes kind of be hard, and we can lose our sight on them. And oftentimes we find ourselves in situations where we fall off the horse, and it's like a one-time thing, and we're like, I tried, I failed. But when we start setting up the right environment, the battle buddies are the people who get us up. Our goal, the thing that hasn't changed, and if we keep our sights set on it, and our limits are the things that help us make bad things hard to do and good things easy to do. I want to kind of end our time today talking about a specific example in my life where all three of these came together and made something that I thought was impossible possible. But before we do that, I want us to just see the end of the Nehemiah story. After he said no, these people are getting desperate. They start spreading rumors that he's going to be the king of Jerusalem and start a rebellion, and he's trying to get Nehemiah to run to the temple in fear because Artaxerxes will send assassins. And if Nehemiah did that, it would make him look like he's guilty of something. But he ignores them because he's in the right environment. And in verse 15 and 16 it says, "So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul." Whatever. In 52 days. And when all of our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem, for they perceived this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. And why I love that verse is because it is so real, because in this book, God doesn't perform a supernatural miracle to get the job done. But everyone assumed that this wall being built in 52 days would be physically impossible. Just like you and I often assume that making that change happen this year, sticking to that New Year's resolution this year, is going to be impossible. We make that assumption, but here's the thing. What God did provide was he provided Nehemiah, who had this vision and built this environment. And you and I too can do stuff that seems impossible when we build the right environments to make the change happen. And to the rest of the world, they won't know how we did it. But you and I will know that we have had that superpower to change when we want to change. And in my life, I can say one of the most clear examples of this was 3.5 years ago when I ran a 10K. And it was the first time in my life I ever did something like that. I never thought I could do something like that. I know a lot of you like 10K, that's like nothing. To me, it was a lot. And it was really hard. But what I did that summer when I decided I was going to run 10K, I set my sight on this goal. There is a 10K on this date. I am signed up. I have paid money. I am going to have to get in shape in order to do this. And I decided I was going to do this alone. I had my friend Ian, who all throughout high school, me and him played football together. We were close friends. We made YouTube videos together, all sorts of stuff. He was going to work out with me. And we need to limit ourselves because, you can get together to say you're going to work out, do 10 push-ups, and then play video games for 4 hours, and it won't really get you anywhere. And so what we did was we drove over to the Manitou Incline in Colorado Springs. Many of you do not know what the Manitou Incline is. It's the old cog railroad that goes up Pikes Peak. It is a 2,000-foot elevation gain of crazy just steps going straight up the side of the mountain. Have any of you ever watched the third Lord of the Rings? Maybe not. Like, there's that scene where they're trying to crawl up the steps to get into Mordor and all of that. Basically, it's like that, There's these crazy steps, go straight up, it's exhausting. And what me and him did was we set limits. We said, at least 2 times a week, we are going to drive to that incline, and we are not going to get in the car and drive back home until we've gone all the way up and back down. And that was the limits. We knew that when we got there, that there wasn't a different workout we're going to do. There wasn't a cheap shortcut we were going to take. We set these limits, and because we spent all the money getting there, because it's you have to park, and we spent all this energy, and we set this minimum times we're going to get there. We set these limits for ourselves, and it kind of made it embarrassing if we wimped out before we got to the top and whatnot. And it made it hard to not go through with the workout. And so we did this workout at least twice a week. Oftentimes we do it 3 times a week. And we'd hike up the incline, we'd jog down Bar Trail. And by the time that I came to that 10K, because I had the right battle buddy, because we had set limits and we kept around this goal, me and him were able to run a 10K, which was something that neither of us could do anywhere near the beginning of that summer. And I can't tell you how incredible it is to finally actually go through with the change that I wanted to make and to actually feel that accomplishment at the end. And maybe there's something like that for you this year for your life. A habit you need to break, so a project you need to start. And this year you can set that goal and finally reach it. Because we become transformed into our best selves as we renew our minds with Spirit-empowered daily habits lived out inside an environment that pushes us to our goal. Dear God, thank you so much that we were able to come today and get to talk about these issues that oftentimes we don't talk about. And oftentimes these things are more practical knowledge than spiritual knowledge, but God, we want to live our best selves for you. And we just ask that you would take this and plant these seeds in our hearts that we can start to make those changes we want to make. And we ask that you would convict us where we need to be convicted today and encourage us where we need to be encouraged. And we thank you and pray in the powerful name of Jesus all these things. Amen. I'm going to invite Robbie back up. He's going to do one more song for us.